Introduction. Welcome to this in-depth journey into the Christian history of Africa. When we think of Christianity, many people immediately picture Rome, Jerusalem, or magnificent European cathedrals. Yet the true story of the Christian faith cannot be told without Africa. From the very beginning of the Bible to the modern era, Africa has been a key player, a crossroads of peoples, cultures, beliefs, and spiritual traditions. But why has this history been forgotten? Why do so many Africans and the rest of the world often ignore this rich and foundational past? Today, we will discover how Africa, even before Europe, received, protected, enriched, and spread the Christian faith through the centuries. This story is filled with incredible figures, brave communities, moments of struggle and rebirth, and deep spiritual transformation. Stay with me until the end, because you will see the Christian history of Africa may be one of the most universal and most forgotten stories of all. Africa in the Bible and Antiquity. Let's begin with the Bible. Africa is present from the very first book, Genesis. Egypt, Nubia, and Ethiopia, often called Cush, are portrayed as lands of power, wealth, refuge, and salvation. Abraham, the father of faith, finds refuge in Egypt during a famine. Joseph, sold by his brothers, rises to become the second most powerful man in Egypt, ultimately saving his family and an entire nation. Moses, central to both Judaism and Christianity, is raised in Pharaoh's palace. The Exodus story shows the Hebrew people growing and suffering in Egypt before their liberation. Later in the Old Testament, African rulers and people appear again. The Queen of Sheba, believed to have come from East Africa, visits King Solomon in Jerusalem, seeking wisdom. This visit inspired strong traditions in Ethiopia, where it's believed that their royal lineage descended from their union. The New Testament also strengthens this link. When King Herod seeks to kill the infant Jesus, the Holy Family flees to Egypt. Jesus grows up in safety on African soil. In the book of Acts, the story of the Ethiopian eunuch baptized by Philip represents the first international Christian conversion. This royal official, a servant of Queen Candace of Ethiopia, reads Isaiah in his chariot. Philip explains the gospel, baptizes him, and according to tradition, he returns to Ethiopia to spread the faith. These passages show that long before the church was formally born, Africa was already present in God's plan, an early and vital participant in the story of salvation. The early Christian centuries in Africa. The Christian community in Carthage was among the most active in the Roman Empire. By the 1st century, Christian communities had formed in Alexandria, said to be founded by Mark the Evangelist. Alexandria quickly became a global intellectual and spiritual hub, home to the greatest library of the ancient world, philosophers, scientists, and influential Christians. In Carthage, now in modern-day Tunisia, churches flourished as early as the 2nd century. The Christian community in Carthage was among the most active in the Roman Empire. Men and women gave their lives for their faith, like Perpetua and Felicity, two young African women martyred around 203 AD. Their prison diaries remain powerful testimonies of courage and conviction. These early African centuries were marked by theological richness, local synods, and strong spiritual leadership. North Africa was not only the breadbasket of Rome, but also the spiritual wellspring of the Western Church. By the 3rd century, there were already hundreds of thousands of Christians in Africa, long before Christianity was adopted in Europe. African bishops took part in major theological debates that shaped Christian doctrine for centuries. Africa as a theological and intellectual center. Africa was not just a land that received Christianity, it was a land that shaped it. In Alexandria, scholars like Clement and Origen laid the foundations for a rational and symbolic reading of Scripture. Origen, born around 185 AD, was one of the greatest theologians of the early church. He wrote hundreds of books, commented on nearly every book of the Bible, debated with Greek philosophers, and invented new tools for biblical study. In Carthage, Tertullian, born around 155 AD, coined the term Trinity, defended the faith against heresies, and defined the role of Christian martyrs. He also emphasized the uniqueness of African Christian thought, distinct from Rome. Perhaps most famously, Saint Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, in present-day Algeria, was one of the most influential thinkers in Christian and global intellectual history. Born in 354 AD to a Berber mother, Monica, and a Roman father, he converted after a restless youth and became a bishop and prolific writer. His masterpieces, the Confessions, the City of God, and On the Trinity, reshaped Christian theology, introducing ideas about grace, free will, evil, and the meaning of history that still influence Christianity today. We must also remember other African giants, Athanasius of Alexandria, Cyril of Alexandria, and Cyprian of Carthage, who played decisive roles in shaping doctrine on Christ's nature and the role of the Church. In short, without Africa, the theology of Christianity as we know it would not exist. Ethiopia and Nubia, Christian African kingdoms. While Egypt and North Africa thrived, East Africa also embraced Christianity in remarkable ways. Ethiopia became one of the first nations in the world to adopt Christianity as a state religion. In the 4th century, King Ezana of Aksum converted to Christianity, guided by Frumentius, a Syrian who had been enslaved and later became the country's first bishop. This move predated most European royal conversions. The Ethiopian church developed a unique identity, translating the Bible into Ge'ez, building rock-hewn churches in Lalibela, creating original icons and music, and developing its own liturgy that differed from Rome or Byzantium. Further north, Christian kingdoms also emerged in Nubia, modern-day Sudan, such as Nubia, Makuria, and Elodia. They built cathedrals, adopted Christian art, and maintained close ties with Egypt and Ethiopia. These kingdoms resisted invasions and political pressures, sustaining vibrant Christian communities for over 1,000 years. Archaeological ruins, ancient manuscripts, and oral traditions provide rich evidence of this flourishing, yet often overlooked legacy. The Coptic Church of Egypt, spirituality and resistance. The Coptic Orthodox Church, tracing its origin to Mark the Evangelist, became the soul of Egyptian Christianity. Despite Roman and later Islamic persecution, the Copts never abandoned their faith. The Egyptian desert gave birth to monasticism. Saint Anthony the Great, Paul of Thebes, and Pachomius pioneered the monastic life, withdrawal, prayer, and community living. Thousands followed them into the desert, forming monasteries that would influence Christian monasticism across the world. Coptic Christians also created vibrant religious art, icons, hymns, poetry, and a rich calendar of saints. They translated the Bible into the Coptic language and contributed heavily to early Christian councils and debates. Even in modern times, despite discrimination and violence, the Coptic community remains strong. Millions of believers continue the legacy in Egypt, Sudan, and the global diaspora. Major challenges: Islam, persecution, and colonization. Africa's Christian journey has also faced major challenges. In the 7th century, Islam swept across North Africa. Most Berber and urban populations converted, but small Christian communities endured, some in secrecy, for centuries. In Egypt, Copts remained faithful despite special taxes, jizya, restrictions, and occasional violence. In Nubia and Ethiopia, Christianity held firm. Ethiopia, in particular, remained an officially Christian nation, even as neighboring regions embraced Islam. A powerful historical moment. In the 7th century, as early Muslims faced persecution in Mecca, they sought asylum with the Christian king of Ethiopia, who welcomed them and refused to return them to their enemies. In the 19th century, European colonization brought missionaries who translated the Bible, opened schools, and built hospitals. But they often carried a Eurocentric and dismissive view of African culture, forgetting or ignoring the continent's deep Christian roots. Africans responded by creating their own churches and resisting colonial spiritual domination. New forms of African Christianity emerged, vibrant, independent, and rooted in local culture. The forgotten and rediscovered heritage. Why was this history erased? Colonialism, cultural domination, and the neglect of African sources led to a loss of memory. Even African schoolbooks once taught that Christianity was a European import. But in recent decades, scholars, artists, and believers have worked to recover this legacy. Excavations have unearthed ancient churches and artifacts. Universities now research and publish about early African Christianity. Museums, films, and documentaries help reclaim the story. Young Africans today are embracing their dual identity, Christian and African, with pride, not contradiction. In the diaspora, Europe, the Americas, and beyond, Africans see themselves as heirs to a millennia-old tradition. Christian Africa today. Contemporary Africa is experiencing a Christian explosion. In 1900, there were fewer than 10 million Christians in Africa. Today, there are over 650 million, with projections reaching nearly 1 billion by 2050. Countries like Nigeria, DR Congo, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Kenya are among the most Christian nations on earth. African Christianity is incredibly diverse: Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, Evangelical, independent African churches, charismatic, and more. Megachurches gather tens of thousands, pastors are social media influencers, and worship music drives cultural and spiritual life. African missionaries now evangelize Europe and America, planting churches in Paris, London, Brussels, and New York. This reverse mission reshapes global Christianity. African churches also play a social role, running schools, hospitals, humanitarian projects, and peace-building initiatives. They promote interfaith dialogue and youth empowerment through faith and service. Conclusion. Telling this story gives Africa its rightful place in global history. Christianity is as African as it is Latin, Greek, or European. This history should give Africans confidence, not shame. It should open the eyes of the world to a chapter without which the Christian story is incomplete. From St. Augustine to the Queen of Sheba, from Mark to Frumentius, from the martyrs of Carthage to today's megachurch pastors, African Christianity is a story of courage, creativity, and resilience. If you want to go further, share this video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know what surprised you and what inspired you. Don't forget, the Christian story of Africa is your story, our story, and it is still being written today, in every church, every home, every heart. Thank you for joining me on this journey.